Hey, you ready?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the webinar series sponsored by Boxer Advisors. We're delighted that all of you can be with us today. Today's session is an important one. So this morning, we're going to take a look at the issue of employee engagement. And we're going to look at it in terms of what's going on relative to employee engagement. We're actually going to look at a tool that some of my colleagues at CCI have developed, and we're going to do our best to answer some questions for you. Before I dive in, since the slide is up, why don't I introduce a couple of my colleagues to you, and then I can cover some housekeeping details. So first, I'd like to introduce Joe Doherty. Joe is one of the members of the senior management team of CCI Consulting, one of our teaming partners. Joe works with a variety of corporate, nonprofit, university clients and federal government clients, and has a really, I think, a strategic view of employee engagement. I'll let Joe say a quick hello to you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Looking forward to talking with you today.
That's great. And then Rachel Medved she partners with individuals to provide guidance and strategies to help them meet their personal and professional goals. Her key areas of expertise include talent development, executive assessment, and thought leadership. And she brings, I think, a fresh perspective and coaching strength to CCI. Her specialties include coaching women, emerging leaders, and high potential leaders. Rachel holds a doctorate in clinical psychology and a master's degree in business admin, both from Widener University. And Rachel will be doing the lion's share of presenting today. So we're delighted to have Rachel with us as well. And Rachel, I'll let you say hello to everyone.
Thanks, Ken. It's great to talk with you all this morning. Looking forward to sharing a little bit more detail about employee engagement and one method for really looking into what's most important to your employees and your folks.
Great. So what I want to do is, before I pass it over to Joe, who will do a quick overview of CCI and then introduce Rachel, what I want to do is two things. One, I want to cover some housekeeping details, and then we've got sort of an interesting mix of people on today's webinar. We've got some colleagues on the webinar. We have some existing clients of ours, and we also have some people who are new to Boxer Advisors. So first, some housekeeping details. First, one of the things that we have done is everyone will be on mute. And the reason we do that is, it can be a little bit distracting if you've got, fire engine sirens in the background or dogs barking. And so we do that to make it easy to follow the session. If you have some questions for either Joe, Rachel, or me during the session, you can, for me, it's at the bottom of my screen and it says Q&A and chat. And so you can type some questions if you have any questions for us during the webinar. And I think Rachel has said that she'll do her best to answer questions as we go. If I know it has happened to me that that if you've got a question and you think of the question when we hang up on the webinar, we're going to give you my email address at the end. And so if you either A, didn't get a chance to ask a question that you had, or B, you think of it afterwards, you can send me an email and Rachel or Joe or I will respond to you. Third is if you're having any technical difficulties, I think Sarah, who is our webinar administrator, will put her email up on the chat bar. And if you're having a hard time hearing us or logging into the system, you can email Sarah, and she will respond quickly and try to get you accessing the webinar. The next thing is I want to let all of you know two things. One, we are recording the session. And so if you would like a recording of the session, because Joe was just that smart and you wanted to capture literally everything that he said, or you want to pass it along to a colleague, again, just send me an email and we will send you a link with the recording. And then secondly, if you'd like a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation, again, just send me an email and we will send it out to you. Before we get underway, we're going to ask you two questions at the end, and I believe we'll also include these questions in a quick survey we're going to send you afterwards. So what I want everyone to do is write down two questions. One question is, what's one thing that you learned from today's webinar? And the second question is, what's one action you're going to take as a result of today's webinar? So, Sarah, are there any other housekeeping details that you think I need to communicate with everyone, or are we good to go?
We are good to go.
All right. So let me give you a quick overview of Boxer Advisors, because there's some of you who are relatively new to us. So next slide, please. So a little bit of background on Boxer Advisors. I think you got to go to, there you go. Next one. There you go. Whoop. So our mission at Boxer Advisors is to deliver the highest impact consulting, coaching, and training solutions to meet organizational needs. We think one of the hallmarks that differentiates us is how we integrate our solutions into other things that the client is trying to do. And when we do that, we're able to see some real measurable results. I know, for instance, one of the things that I am proud of is there's an agency in the intelligence community. It starts with a C, that ends with an A, and there's an I in the middle. And we worked with them on over a number of years on employee engagement. And in one division, they were able to track an increase in employee satisfaction as a direct result of our efforts. And so, again, nothing against any of our other clients, but it is pretty rewarding if you think about the impact of employee satisfaction on employee engagement, and if we were able to even a little bit influence how the agency goes about their efforts to fight terrorism. I was pretty proud of that. So next slide, please. So the focus of our work at Boxer Advisors is there's three things that we do. We help clients develop partnerships with internal, external clients. Second, we integrate best-in-class solutions. And the third thing that we do is we help clients translate insights into actions. So, whether we're doing a webinar or a 5-day training session or we're coaching senior executives, we're always trying to look at how can we help people take what they learned back on the job. So I'm proud of the work that we've done with almost 40 federal agencies and a number of large companies and really well-run nonprofits. We're delighted that you're with us today, and really I'm really interested in diving into this whole issue of employee engagement. So without further ado, let me introduce back to you Joe Doherty, who will take us from here.
Ken, thanks very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Doherty from CCI Consulting. Thrilled to be here with you guys, but before we get started, I do want to thank Ken and his team. We're going on about our second year now of being a strategic advisor to our strategic partner to Boxer Advisors, and you know, it's been a great partnership. And this webinar series that he does monthly has been of great value to me and my team. We've started joining for the past 6 months, and we get a lot out of it, and we're happy to be here now to put some back in. So who is CCI? I'd love to give you guys a quick overview. It actually is pretty seamless to what Ken was describing about Boxer Advisors, because we are a talent management and HR consulting firm, and we work with organizations large and small to essentially, we want to drive sustainable business results by effectively aligning your people strategies to your current and future business needs. So as you can see, our focus is very closely aligned with Ken's. So from a practice standpoint, we help organizations attract and retain the right talent to achieve business goals. We help enable leaders and teams to elevate engagement, which we're going to talk about today, performance and resiliency. We help enhance the capacity and capability of HR operations and strategies. And we address the constantly evolving talent needs through career development, management, and transition. So you can see through that graphic there, all of those practice areas and all those impacts that we have on businesses are kind of intertwined. So that's the logo that we designed and we take to market. Just a little bit about us. We've been in business for 31 years now. We just had our 30th birthday last year. We're headquartered just out. Well, thank you, Ken.
Yeah, that's impressive.
We're headquartered just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for the past 30 years, we've been building a growing market here really in the New York to DC corridor, but the heartbeat is certainly here in Philadelphia. And the majority of our business over the years has been in the private sector, as well as nonprofits and the higher education sector. But really over the past 5 years, and then with a heavy focus in the past 2, we have been really looking to grow into the federal marketplace, and Ken has just been extraordinary in helping us to do that, really learning to speak the language of the federal government, understanding the dynamics and the relationships, and how to translate what we do into that marketplace. So we're proud to be a GSA contract holder, and we're really meeting a lot of people, and the most exciting thing is we're not just going to be doing it from Philadelphia. We are going to be opening actual offices in the DC area and partnering with organizations just like Ken to really bring our impact to the DC and federal marketplace. Looking at the attendee list, there's some very interesting people on this call. So we're thrilled to tell you about employee engagement, which for years had always been an abstract topic. It was something that people thought about. It was something that companies knew was important, but we could never really quantify. What does it mean? How does it impact? As I said earlier, we're all about aligning people strategies to current and future business needs. That means it needs to be quantifiable. We need to show ROI. So we're going to show you today a little bit about a tool that we use. First, we're going to make the business case. Why use this tool? Then we're going to show you our tool, and we're going to share how you can bring it into your organization. So before we do that, I just want to touch on this. A lot of you work for very, very large organizations, and I don't want you to think you have to bring your tool in for the entire Department of Labor or the entire Federal Aviation Administration. You can bring this in at the division level or the team level or the whatever, wherever you can start and bring this in and show how it works. Then what we see is this quickly becomes viral and spread through the organization once people see the true ROI. So as you look at this, don't think that you need to do a massive lift to bring a tool like this into your organization. So again, I'm going to hand this off in just a second, but for me personally, I've spent 17 years of my career with CCI now. I love what I do. We've had a lot of success. That success is only going to continue, but the only way we've been able to do that is by adding really, really smart people to our team and people that really, really care about their clients. One of those people are here with me today. That's Rachel Medvin, who heads up both our executive coaching practice area as well as our employee engagement area, and there's no one better to tell you more about employee engagement. So I'll hand it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Joe. That's so kind of you to say. As I mentioned before, everyone, it's great to meet you, great to have you on this call. I'm really looking forward to talking with you in a little bit more detail about what employee engagement is, what it could be utilized as an opportunity to further engage your workforce with a survey process, and then really build off from there. So briefly, to set an agenda for what I hope to focus on today, we're going to set a definition on what is employee engagement, what is it not. We're also going to talk about the survey process that CCI has developed, how we've found to be an effective mechanism for surveying engagement within your workforce, and then the analytics that are involved therein. We're then going to look at some strategies for how do we mobilize, what do we do after the survey has been completed, so how do we take action against some of those results. We're going to talk briefly about what are some of the do's and the don'ts. Again, we're looking at sustainable action. We don't want to see something that changes in the short term and it goes back to older, more ineffective behaviors. Our biggest interest is around sustainable change that's going to be maintained in the long term. And then finally, I'm going to offer you a case study or two to just highlight what is a best practice approach and what is an experience that one of our clients has had with this survey methodology. So really briefly, let's talk about what employee engagement is. So engagement is the emotional commitment that an employee has to the organization at a high level. So when we think of an engaged employee, a highly engaged employee, these are the people that go, what we would say, above and beyond what is just in their job description. So the folks that come in early, stay late, do so with a smile on their face, really seem that they are the drivers, I would say, of the business. They're the folks who are going out and talking with other people in a social manner as well as a more formal networking manner about the company, about its positives, acknowledging that there may be some growth opportunities as well. But these are your biggest proponents when we look at your engaged workforce. So in thinking about the workforce, we really view three different levels, I would say, of engagement. So we have those folks that I mentioned that are highly engaged. This is typically 20 to 30% of your population. We have those who are kind of in the middle. They're neither engaged nor disengaged. They're maybe a little bit more apathetic. These are our neutral folks, which is typically 40 to 60% of your population. And then we have our actively disengaged group, those folks who are really looking for the back door. This is also generally about 20 to 30% of your population. I'm going to come back to each one of these groups a little bit later on to talk in more detail about what we're looking to do to engage those who are fully engaged, how we want to modify and further engage those that are neutral, and how we want to take action with those folks that are more actively disengaged. When we think about the factors that drive active engagement, there's a number of things that come to mind, things like having a comfortable work environment or a physical location. Obviously, the financial aspect is a critical piece for many employees. Food, sort of as silly as it can sound out loud for employees, especially at plants that have a cafeteria, or do they have access to food throughout the day? It's an important thing to consider. We also have initiatives like this company that has a take your dog to work day. I think CCI should implement something like that personally. Work-life balance programs that may offer reimbursement for gyms or a gym on site, or things that further engage the team, such as team building exercises. It kind of looks like this group is going to the beach. Ken, I'm curious, what else comes to mind for you of what might be important for an employee?
Yeah, I think going to the beach is the right answer. we should plan a road trip, Rachel, I think. My sense and experience tells me that there are a couple of things that I think this is an interesting list. I think that the two others, I mean, you sort of touch on it with the last point you made around team building, but one of my favorite books is called The First 90 Days, and it talks about, how do you onboard people at the beginning. And I know one of the things they talk about is the importance to connecting with other people at the beginning. And so you mentioned team building, but I would say connecting with other colleagues, I think does drive employee engagement. That if you're connected with other people, that tends to increase your level of engagement with the organization. And the second thing that I would say is, a lot of the data that I've seen, speaks to the importance of that first line supervisor, that either they can make the organization a really good place around employee engagement, or they can drive people away. So those would be two things that I would add to your list, Rachel.
And I think those are both really, really great points, Ken, and things that we do want to keep in mind. what our research at CCI has uncovered is 5 facets that really actively drive engagement. So these are the things that, based on the surveys that we've conducted, the research that we've compiled, these are the 5 things that seem to be most important to individuals across organizations, across industries, across levels, and across the sizes of the organization, as well as the other demographic variables, region, location, country of origin, all of those factors. And these things in no particular order. The first is meaningfulness. So across the board, people, regardless of whether they are a bank teller, a plant manager, or somewhere in between, they want to have a sense that their work matters. They want to feel a connection or an impact that's being made. The second thing is belonging, having that sense of affiliation within the organization, and whether that's encompassed by having team building exercises, by having a company motto, company t-shirts, things that just really pull people in and have a sense that we are unified and we come together as a group to have that impact and that meaning. Having a clear vision and values and an understanding of what those vision and values are at the individual employee level. It can be great. Many organizations have beautifully, eloquently written vision, values, mission statement, but at the employee level, to have a sense of actually what that means and that we are living into those commitments is very important. We also have an understanding of autonomy, and I want to clarify here that this is having an appropriate level of control over my work. It's not indicating that every single person should be able to assign their every single step and task throughout the day, but at a level of what's appropriate for an individual contributor, for a manager, for someone with more senior executive authority, figuring out how do we engender independence within this group, because that is further driving engagement when someone feels that their thoughts and ideas matter and are being heard. And that 5th thing, I'm sure we can all agree on this, is the importance of communication. So we really see this sense of when there's an organizational culture or climate that's really promoting open conversation around what's important to us, what's going well, what could be going better, and how do we look at those factors. That's a big importance for many employees. Again, they want to feel that their perspectives are being heard and are being valued appropriately. So it's really easy to say that these are the things that are most important about engagement, but why at the end of the day does employee engagement matter? There's a breadth and depth of research out there from Harvard Business Review, from other great sources, as well as independent reviewers, that looks at the relationship that exists. And we know that employee engagement is related to factors such as profitability, return, as Joe mentioned before, revenue, safety, and even customer service. So these are the employees that, again, we want to look at what is the impact of having engaged employees versus disengaged employees. We have some research that identifies at a high level what are some of the factors associated with an engaged workforce around quality, shareholder return, productivity, and then, of course, higher customer satisfaction ratings. And this research is being reflected again between survey to survey, population to population, regardless of a lot of the demographic factors that go into it. So seemingly across the board, we are seeing strong impact when a company includes an employee engagement process and works to further motivate and engage their workforce. We look at several factors of engagement. So within CCI, we have what we call 2 precursors. These are the things that must be in place before engagement can happen. And then we have our catalysts. So what are the factors that drive active engagement? Our precursors are things like role clarity and work context, because it's very difficult to do your job if you don't really know what your job entails, if you don't have the resources to do that job. Again, if you're a plant manager and you don't have the safety gear that you need, it's very difficult to actually make sure that safety is being maintained across the board. Similarly, in work context, we want to understand what is the climate, what is the environment, how does supervision work, how is the relations among coworkers, and so forth. These are factors that if we don't have, it's very difficult for an employee to even become engaged in the first place. Our catalysts, on the other hand, are job satisfaction and organizational commitment. So you'll see here again that impact on meaningfulness. We know that employees want to believe their work, regardless of what it is, it's having a meaningful impact. So we look to understand how is that factoring into how satisfied they are. And from an organizational level, how engaged is the senior leadership team? How aligned are employees with the vision, mission, values, and objectives? If you'll recall before, I mentioned that there were 3 groups that are often seen throughout the workforce. So the first is, of course, our strivers. These are the folks that are highly engaged. We have our silent majority folks, which are the folks that are, again, kind of neutral, neither strongly engaged, but not strongly disengaged either. And then we have what we call our drifters, the people who are more actively disengaged than we may prefer. So to go into a little bit more detail about each group, with our strivers, these are the folks that we really want to celebrate and support. They are already motivated by the work, they're committed to the organization. These are the people that are already giving us 110% of their time, energy, and effort, both during work hours as well as outside of those work hours when they're talking about their company to others, talking about its benefits, talking about the opportunities there. So the things that we really keep in mind with this group, again, they're giving their all. These are not the folks that are being tempted by raises or by other opportunities elsewhere. It's not to say that those things are not going to pique their interest, but at the end of the day, when someone is truly a striver, they are so committed to their individual employer, they're really not out there looking across the board for other opportunities. Then, of course, we have our silent majority. This is, as we know, the majority of our folks where they're neither engaged nor disengaged. They're just kind of existing. They are, as we know, they're often conscientious. They're hardworking. When they're at work, they are giving it their all, but maybe not above and beyond. Maybe just sort of living into the commitments that are being made by their job description. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we are aware of on the back end is that there's a moderate degree of flight risk with these folks, that we have an opportunity to further engage them, to further generate commitment within the organization and to the organization to help retain them, develop them, and then utilize that job knowledge for future growth within the organization. That's why we often recommend further engaging this particular subset of your population in order to see measurable impact.
Hey, Rachel?
Yeah, of course.
Before you move off of the silent majority, I'm just curious, is there a specific strategy other than to just do something that you think works with this important segment of the workforce?
Absolutely. And part of what we know is really important is figuring out what is most critical to each one of these groups. And that does differ across different employer organizations and across different subsets of populations. So one of the advantages of a survey process is it allows you to cut and dice the data, as we say, to really understand what's critical to your particular silent majority. And we could look at the silent majority of individuals who are perhaps we see a gap within a certain tenure range. We see maybe our 2 to 5 year employees are starting to go a little bit more radio silent on us, or our millennials or our baby boomers. Whatever those demographic variables are, we can really identify who are those folks that, again, are neither strongly engaged nor strongly disengaged that we do want to further empower. Great question, though, Ken. So jumping from our silent majority, the last group that we have is, of course, our drifters. And we want to beware of them, but also be aware of them because they are a portion of the population. We don't want to exclude them. So these, as we said before, are the folks that are really just looking for that back door. They are ready to get out. They are ready to take the next opportunity. They may not be looking to actively sabotage anything within the organization, but they are not engaged. Their mental space when they are at work is on the next thing that's coming down the line. So what we've understood from our research is that some of the causes of disengagement are those precursor factors. So when people feel that they are not recognized or rewarded appropriately, that their salary isn't on point for where they want it to be. I think, Ken, you mentioned before the old aphorism of people don't leave bad businesses, they leave bad managers. And at the end of the day, supervision is really critical. The relationship that people have with their supervisor is of great importance. And what we also know is that people within this category might like their job or even might love their job, but may have a frustration with the larger organization. There may be a sense that, again, the vision, mission, and values is not aligned, or that they don't understand what the direction the company is going in the future, or maybe they feel unsafe or unsure of the direction the company is going in the future. And because of that, they're looking for that alternate employment. So what we've seen and what our research and other research has uncovered is that this is the group that has often invested a lot of time and energy and money from the leadership team perspective to try to get them motivated, often without great success, because again, these folks are looking for that back door. They're not really looking to make a change. So an engagement survey process can help to uncover, again, what's important to this group, which can be used to further drive engagement within this subset of the population. So how do we know if the workforce is engaged or not? So we're looking at a high level for those factors or those indicators of disengagement and correlated for the corresponding factors of engagement. So these are things like we know that engaged employees are energetic, passionate, and so forth. Conversely, our disengaged employees are passive and irresponsible. Generally, by the time that CCI is brought in to do an engagement survey process, our sponsors have an understanding or have a visual about which side they likely perceive many of their employees on, because these are things that are very visible throughout the organization, especially to someone in an HR or leadership role who is seeing some of those factors. When we're looking to actively measure engagement, there's a number of things that we're looking to do that we know to be important. So our employee engagement survey process, and what we know across all employee engagement surveys, is that we're looking for a process that will gather individually anonymous data. And I want to emphasize here briefly the importance of confidentiality and anonymity in the survey process. This is one of the advantages, in my mind, of partnering with an outside company versus trying to do something internal, because there's a sense that when employees are being asked to share their perspective, they want to feel safe in doing so. They want to feel that their results are not going to be connected back to their name in any way, shape, or form, so that it's not going to come back and penalize them or have a consequence against them. So maintaining confidentiality across the board is a really key piece and something that we believe is best practice. We look at the overall pattern of engagement or disengagement as well as the underlying causes. So we're really looking for trends and themes that emerge from the data, not just that a single person has said one thing, but that 3, 5, 50, 500 people are all emphasizing different aspects of the same trend. That's something that we then would recommend to look into with a little bit more detail. And then finally, we want to look at what can be taken, or what actions can be taken against the data. Now that we have these results, how do we change? How do we further engage our population and change our workforce to drive things further? The most important thing that I can emphasize here is that an employee engagement survey is just an intervention, and it should not be undertaken unless an organization is really looking to make actionable change. Action must be taken when you've actually asked your employees to provide feedback. They're then waiting to see a change effort. So the best thing that you can do is utilize the survey and then develop an action plan that then moves the company forward a little bit. So our employee engagement process looks at those factors that we discussed before around our precursors of role clarity and work context, and then the job satisfaction and organizational commitment as catalysts. If you look at this image here, we have each one of those titles, and then underneath is a series of bullet points. Those are the facet areas that our survey uncovers. So we are actually able to look and provide quantitative data around each one of these different factor and facet areas. And then we can then correlate them to see what's most critical within each subset of your population. So for example, we know that tenure is often a demographic variable that we include within our survey. We often see the highest level of engagement within that first year of an employee joining an organization for a number of reasons. They feel very driven. They feel that they've made a great choice. They haven't had the chance yet to become disillusioned, many times because they haven't seen the long-term impact of the company. What we do know is that if active steps aren't taken here to further engage the organization, we do tend to see a drop-off in how employees rate themselves over the next 2 to 5 years. We do see that drop-off in what the score is when we ask them, when provided with a definition of what is an engaged employee and how well do you meet this definition. So once we do the survey, we're looking to see what steps can be taken. So some of the challenges that we typically see the most frequently are questions around growth, recognition, and communication. So growth is a feeling of not just around, I want to be promoted and there's no promotion opportunities, but how can I further develop within an organization? Many times people don't see career pathing that's available to them, and that's something that can further drive engagement. Similarly, recognition. It's very easy to focus on what's not going well, but equally important, if not more important, to recognize and celebrate the successes of your employees at the same time. And then finally, communication. Again, we want employees to have dialogue and interaction throughout the group. So at a high level, some of those do's and don'ts. So our do's, we want people to understand how employees are experiencing the organization. So we actually want to hear from them at an individual level, as well as a team and group and dynamic level. We want to attend to their desire for those factors around growth, recognition, and communication. And then finally, we understand that what drives those factors around engagement really varies. One size does not fit all here when it comes to an employee engagement survey process. Some of the don'ts of an engagement survey is, as I mentioned before, we do not recommend doing a survey unless you're willing to acknowledge the feedback and to act on the results. One of the worst things that can happen is for an employee to provide feedback and be sitting on tenterhooks waiting to see a change effort, and then nothing coming down the pipeline. That does actively can disengage folks. As I mentioned before, we always want to celebrate and leverage those things that are being done well. So we don't want to forget that in the midst of making change. And then we don't want to confuse employee satisfaction with employee engagement. So really briefly, this is one of those, a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't a square thing. So engaged employees may be satisfied with their jobs, but satisfied employees are not necessarily engaged with theirs. So a satisfied employee might be the person who, again, is showing up and doing their work and doing it well, but is not really a driver and a mover and a talker about the organization. So I want to share with you a brief case study of an organizational client that we've worked with to provide employee engagement surveys across the last couple of years. So briefly, as a background, they are a Philadelphia area healthcare organization. They came to us initially because there were some operational issues related to growth. They had acquired a number of smaller businesses and were really struggling to maintain a unified culture, to implement a unified culture across the board and identify what does their senior leadership team really look like because of all of these employees coming together. There had been major growth. So again, many folks had been there less than 2 years. And the employees, the leadership really just wanted to understand what was most critical to these employees because they were new, because they didn't know what was going to help drive engagement. And they had never done an engagement survey process before. So they really came in with eyes wide open, very open to kind of making something work together. So we began by collecting the data. So we worked collaboratively with the client company to design the process, to customize questions where needed, and then we utilized a web-based survey. We do typically recommend, for a methodology standpoint, that we utilize an online survey. We see the highest response rates, as well as when the survey is sent via email, we can send reminders to, again, further drive that response rate up. We do offer pen and pencil tests. That's particularly useful for those employees that may not have access to computers or may not have an employee email address, although we do recognize it does tend to lead to a lower response rate. We worked with the client to help them build a pre-survey communications process. So that included emails and messaging that was sent out by both HR as well as the company president. It included messages on their break room walls and other opportunities just to let people know that the survey was coming, why it was important for them to participate, and talked about the fact that this was a confidential survey undertaken by an outside partner firm, CCI. The survey was launched over a 2-week window, and overall, we saw a 97% response rate, which was really, really strong. Generally, we're pretty satisfied with anything over about 80%. That tends to indicate a good response rate. After the survey was completed, the president then sent a thank you note to everyone, letting them know that their voices had been heard and that we would be taking action, or they would be taking action against the results. At a high level, this is some of what the results looked like. So if we look at the image on the right, that's our overall engagement summary score. So we had a 64% favorable or engaged population, a 24% neutral population, and then a 12% disengaged. This was particularly strong from our mind. We typically see it in even thirds, 3rd percent highly engaged, 3rd percent neutral, 3rd percent highly disengaged. So we were very, very pleased to see this factor here. We then showed them the response favorability. Again, how did people respond to each one of those factor areas? But where they actually found the most value was in looking at a heat map that helped them to understand how the different groups responded based on demographic variables. So this map shows us what is important within the tenure of the organizational employees. So we can look at things that were our strongest factors, in this case were work outcomes and meaningfulness. And then our lowest factors here was in that 1 to 2 year range, and it was compensation and growth, that those employees just did not feel that those opportunities were available to them. So the heat map really helps us to understand from a visual perspective what's important to different groups across the board. So when we see all the greens, for instance, under operations, those are darker and higher scores. When we see a lot of the orange and yellow scores, those are lower scores. So for instance, we can see here that operations was much more highly engaged than our IT team within this particular subset.
Hey, Rachel?
Yes.
I've got a question from one of the participants, if that's all right.
Please.
Yeah, so the question was 97% return rate seems extraordinary. One part of the question is that consistent with the surveys that you guys administer? And if so, what do you account for the really high response rate?
Great question. So generally, we hope and expect to see response rates anywhere from around 75% to 85%. That's our general area. For this particular client company, they actually incentivized their employees to take part. So what they did was they had I think if I'm recalling correctly, it was a luncheon was provided to, at the expense of the company, was provided to every department, or in this case, every location that had 100% response rate during the survey process. So they had, I believe, 16 different locations at this time, and 14 of them had 100% of their employees participate. So those groups each got a luncheon provided by the company. I know that they had also considered a number of other things before settling on that. They looked at incentivizing people by having a random drawing for a gift card, or by otherwise rewarding random employees who utilize the survey process. We do see that incentives tend to drive response rates. But at the end of the day, the response rate itself is an indication of the engagement within the workforce. So if we see a lower response rate, something that's in the 60% range, that may be what is typical for that particular company. So we do look at that as a data point in itself.
And Ken, the 3% that did not respond, they were digging their heels in. No such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, personally, I find that extraordinary to have that high a percentage response rate. So I figured there must have been something that you were doing other than, Joe's good looks that said, you get a luncheon with Joe or something. I don't know.
No, it is, and that's a lot of the importance of that pre-survey communication, and being really clear on the messaging around what is the survey and why is it taking place, and helping people to feel, again, that their voices will be heard, that change will be made, and that the organization is really committed to furthering this process. This organization did a great job of taking what we offered as our sample communications package and really customizing it. And the president was a huge proponent of this work. And I think when she would speak about it to people at the individual level, when she was walking down the hall in the morning, coming in and leaving at the end of the day, people really listened and really felt that she truly, truly believed that this was a worthwhile experience for them to have. And because of that, they made time in their day. The organization encouraged people to take, I think, an additional 15 or 20-minute break, whether it was during lunch or at another time during the day, to really invest their time in the survey itself. Fantastic question, though.
Well, it's impressive those are great results. That's great.
It is. Again, a little bit of a higher response rate than we tend to see, but nonetheless a great success story for that organization. So we met with them, we reviewed the results, and one of the things that they found to be most critical, and that we found to be most critical from a visual standpoint, is what we call our impact map, which looks at the correlation between self-reported engagement and each one of those factors. So we help people to identify, based on this map, what are the factors that are most critical for them to work on. So generally, we focus on those items that are in the lower right-hand quadrant. That's what we talk about as our improved quadrant, the factors that are very important to individual employees, but have lower scores. So again, the employees think that these things are important, but the organization is not doing them as well as they could be, truthfully. So for this particular client, we emphasize the things in our monitor box, our maintain box, our leverage, and then that improved quadrant. and we focused on the areas that were most critical. They identified leadership, openness, recognition, and growth as being their most pivotal areas for change going into the future. So from there, what we did was we worked with the client to debrief and to utilize an action planning session with the leadership team that really reviewed what are the results, what do we recommend based on those results, and then help them to really empower at an organizational level, what are the things to focus on. They identified recognition, communication, growth, and feedback as their primary developmental opportunities. The president and the HR team then cascaded the results in an appropriate manner across the management team, the lower level management team, to help them engage their individual teams and again, empower the individual employees to say, this is what's most important for us. This is how we can take action against some of these factors. So again, it's not just senior leadership directing or dictating change, but actually really engaging the employees in the factor or in the opportunity to grow and to utilize the process going forward. They had those town hall meetings that shared their results, and then they pulled employees at various levels to create those action plans.
Hey, Rachel?
Yeah.
I've got another question from the audience. So the question is, Josh Burson views engagement survey as engagement 1.0 and not as effective as other methods to capture the voice of the employee as engagement 2.0 and incorporation of AI engagement 3.0. How does this survey address the advancing needs of employee engagement?
That is a fantastic question. And again, at the end of the day, as I said before, the survey or a survey, any survey is just a single data point. It's just a single intervention. So there's opportunities to engage with an organization in multiple manners to really drive engagement and understand engagement within their workforce. So utilizing a survey process that also includes focus groups, for example, may be one way of further leveraging the workforce to help identify what's critical and then how do we make change. For many organizations, they use a survey process that's then repeated every 18 months to every 2 to 3 years to really identify what drivers are changing within their workforce. Again, we don't want it to be a static one and done kind of process. It's great to have it as a snapshot tool, but at the end of the day, that's only giving you wings or only giving you a lens on one particular opportunity within the workforce. One of the things that we do with each of our clients is to customize questions where appropriate to make sure that they are reflective of terminology, of an understanding of who is the leadership team. Is there a specific term that's used to identify these folks? And around critical employee objectives as well. So I sort of tongue-in-cheek mentioned the take your dog to work day before. But if an organization has an initiative like that that's really critical, what we want to do is we do want to customize the survey to reflect that and to utilize an understanding from a data perspective around how do different employees really truly feel about that initiative, and is it a lever for driving engagement? So there is a wealth of opportunity out there for engaging in more customized measures beyond just a single snapshot employee engagement survey. Also a fantastic question though. Really briefly, what we did after this is the organization saw at a high level significant growth across the board. I'm not going to read these all to you, but the one that I do want to emphasize is the bolded one in green down at the bottom, that almost 7% increase in employees' view across the board of this being a great place to work. Again, when we have engagement, we have folks that are going out and talking about how much they like working at their organization, that drives other individuals from outside of the company to look at potential job opportunities within it. So when we know that these folks, after the survey was being completed, that they were going out and they were talking about what they liked, what was going well, all of those things that were so strong about this employee organization, it was really driving an interest within those folks around them. And then they brought us in a year later to actually look and see what's changed within our workforce. So at about 12, I think it was truly 13 months apart, we did these two surveys. We saw a number of factors. So again, recognition, the second item down, was something that they were really considerate around looking to change. We saw an 11% growth there around how employees felt that they were now being effectively recognized and motivated to encourage growth within the organization. And similarly, we did see growth across the board. We also saw one avenue where things dropped. If you look down to the second to last one, that they actually felt that their supervisors were not addressing performance as clearly as they had been before. So we came back, and when we reflected the data back to them after the Pulse survey 1 year later, we talked about how this was something that had slipped through the cracks as employees were focusing, or as the organization was focusing on their key items. This was something that we wanted to make sure was not left in the dust. So we were able to really help them identify at these 2 time periods. They've actually just brought us back about 3 months ago to do a new survey to really, again, look to see, as the organization has changed, what factors are most important for those folks. So just to kind of sum everything up and to leave you with 5 easy steps for what's important for an engagement survey process. The first thing is to solicit that input. You can't make change until you really understand what's going on within your organization and what's most important to your people. The second thing is we want to acknowledge the feedback. We want to not just think about the things, or not just talk about the things that we've done well, but also acknowledge that there are growth opportunities ahead of the organization by sharing information across the board, figuring out what's an appropriate way to do so within each level of the client, or within each level of the organization. And then again, we want to empower individual employees at the individual, team, and organizational level to be part of the process of change. This is not just a chance, or it's not just for senior management to dictate, but to really further utilize your employees to identify how do we take action against this data? How do we really drive into the next opportunity? We want to have specific action steps. It's very easy to say at a high level what you want to do, but the most critical thing is to break that down into meaningful, accomplished steps. Many people use a SMART goal style format that will be taken around how do we address these needs. And then finally, having clear communication across the board. There's a lot of communication that goes into the survey process from the leadership team or the HR throughout the entire organization, but we want to make sure that that, again, continues and sustains going forward. And at the end of the day, again, employee engagement is just, or a survey is just a process to understand your workforce. It's what you do afterwards that really makes change and helps you to further utilize the workforce and to further engage a workforce that is inspired to come to work every day. So I do encourage you, if you have not looked at utilizing a survey process or a similar process to understand your employees' experiences, to really take that into consideration around how can you do so going forward. And I'll turn this back over to you all and to Ken around any questions or comments that you may have at this point.
That's great. So, Rachel, we've got just a few minutes. I've got a couple other questions from participants.
Great.
One question is, can you've actually, this has been fascinating and really, I think, really instructive to hear about the tool. That's me, that's not the question. The question is, can you tell us anything that you haven't shared with us about how the survey is administered, anything about the methodology?
Absolutely. So I briefly mentioned before that there's 2 typical methods for administering the survey, which is online or pen and pencil. We do tend to steer towards online when at all possible to increase response rates and also to ensure the opportunity to send reminders. From an online perspective, the survey can be sent out via email that can be taken on a smartphone, a tablet, or a computer. We can also use what we call open URLs, which can be utilized on a kiosk-style computer. So if there's a computer, for example, in the break room, or a tablet that can be set up, one employee can take it, finish their survey, and then hand it over to the next person. We do offer pen and pencil tests as well. They're sort of like a Scantron, if you think back to taking tests in middle and high school, where you bubble in the things that are most critical to you. This survey includes a number of questions that are quantitative in nature, as well as an opportunity to provide qualitative feedback. So we typically include 3 open-ended questions that give people a chance to just share in their own words what's going well within the organization, what could be better, and what they'd like to share with senior leadership. And I am always impressed with the breadth and depth of responses there. We have some people who truthfully don't take it very seriously. They might give us a word or 2, they may skip a question, and that's fine, because we also have people who are very thoughtful and eloquent in providing their responses to these open-ended questions and might give us paragraphs upon paragraphs of data. Generally, the survey takes about 15 minutes to administer. But again, when we have folks that really have a lot to say in that open-ended section, it can take a few minutes longer. I'd say on average, we probably look at about 10 minutes or so it takes to go through the survey process. The survey can be administered in English as well as other languages, both either on paper or in the online survey. We have the chance to utilize a translation tool or a translation process that helps to look at, again, what's critical to those employees across the board. So we know that some employees may speak some English enough to get by with their jobs, but in order to really truly communicate their experience, to be able to speak to them in their own language can be a really powerful tool for, again, showing that the organization wants to hear what they have to say.
Great. I have one other question from the participants. I know we've got about 5 minutes, so if you can give us maybe a 2-minute answer to this. So one other question that came in, Rachel, is there a best practice that you have, any suggestions for sharing the results from an employee engagement survey?
Absolutely. So what I can do is I can actually share with you what this particular client company that we gave in the example in the presentation did. Because I think at the end of the day, it really is a case-by-case basis, because many organizations understand their employee population best. You know, if employees are remote across the organization, across the United States, it's more difficult to come together, for example, in a town hall meeting. So we want to be conscientious of what does the organization look like? How do employees actually do their work every day, before necessarily stating this is the one true way to give all feedback. The most important thing that we always emphasize is that immediately after the survey ends, ideally within 1 to 2 business days at most, the president and/or sponsor of the survey needs to send out a communication message to everyone, letting them know that the survey is completed, thanking them for participating, and then setting a timeline on when they can expect feedback. It does not need to be a specific timeline. It does not need to say, you know, today is Friday, within 2 weeks you're going to have X details, and within 4 weeks you're going to have Y details. But just letting folks know at a high level that feedback will be coming down and will be shared. Generally, the next thing that we do is we come in and we preview the results with the senior leadership team and the HR sponsor to be aware of, again, what are the trends across the board? What are the things that we see as particular strengths to leverage and developmental opportunities? Oftentimes, this presentation is then utilized by the company president if there's a management team, sort of a management team meeting or other senior leadership team meeting. When there's a board of directors, it's often shared with them as well for feedback, support, and alignment. Within this organization, what they did and what we recommended is, because they were all local and they were looking to unify the organization, we did recommend that they come together as a group for a town hall meeting. CCI was an active participant there, but we really left the majority of the results conversation to the company president, because it was her opportunity to step in and talk about why this process was so important to her on a personal level, and what her vision for the future of the organization was in terms of what the results indicated and what she saw as the most critical piece. The results were then cascaded and broken out by division, in this case by location, because that's how they wanted to approach it. And each head, the director of each location was given the results of the entire company compared to their particular subset, and then asked to further engage their workforce around a focus group to say what's most critical to us. Because what was most important to the location just outside of Philadelphia was not the same things that was important to the group outside of Long Island. So we worked with them individually to understand what their results were, and then how to identify their top 3 developmental objectives within that group. They then empowered their employees to say, okay, we want to work on communication, recognition, supervision, whatever the case may be. What does that mean to us, and how do we do that? The company president and HR sponsor then checked in with them at certain timeline points. I believe it was 3 months, 6 months, and then 9 months later, to see what measures have been taken. And again, to function as an accountability partner to make sure that these things were not forgotten about in the hustle and bustle of everyday work. We then came back and did the survey about 12 months later to really re-identify, has measurable change been occurring in those identified areas. Again, reflected that the results back to the company leadership, and they took the lead on sharing them within the organization. So a very comprehensive process.
That's great. So Rachel, I have 10:58, so I'm just going to suggest if we can go to the next slide. Again, I said at the beginning, 2 questions. We're going to send these to you in a survey. If you've got answers, that would be great. Rachel has been very generous and has offered for the first 3 people that send me an email, she's willing to have a one-on-one coaching session for the first 3 people that send me an email. And, it can be about, what are some ways that you can implement an employee engagement survey, or she can talk you through, what are some ways that you can get set up before you're going to launch an employee engagement survey. And so if you send me an email and make a request for that meeting, we will make that happen. Last slide. And so I think, my email address is here, and I see that Sarah has listed the 2 upcoming sessions that we're having. June 5th, we're having a session, taking care of stress in the workplace. I know Cynthia Lackner did a session for us last year. I know that will be interesting. And then in July, one of our colleagues, Mary Lippett, is doing a session on boosting mental agility and critical thinking, July 17th. So the next 2 sessions, again, June 5th at 12 noon and July 17th at 12 noon. Before I let everyone go, I want to do 2 things. One, again, I want to thank all of you for participating in the webinar today. I thought you guys asked some really good questions. And lastly, I want to thank both Joe and Rachel for stepping in and delivering a really informative session. Joe and Rachel, I'll let you guys have a final word.
Hey, thanks, Ken. Hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for your participation. If you see an opportunity to bring this into your organization, please reach out to Ken. He'll combine Team Boxer Advisors with Team CCI. We'll bring it to you. But really, you heard Rachel tell a great story. Help us bring that story to other organizations. This really makes an impact and allows you an opportunity to really bring the same results we just talked about. So look forward to meeting you all and working with you someday soon.
And just to add, thank you all for your time and effort this morning. We appreciate you listening in and would love to follow up for any questions that you may have going forward.
That's great. Again, thanks, Rachel. You did great. Sarah, thanks for, as always, being an administrator par excellence. And with that, that's the end of today's webinar.